All right. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're zooming in from today. And welcome to the Using Data Systems to Advance Early Childhood Programs learning session. My name is Howard Morrison, and I'm the facilitator for today's session. And I'm going to run through a few logistics before we get started. So first, if you haven't already done so, please change your name on Zoom to share your first and last name and identify the state that you are from. That'll help us when we get to the question and answer portion of the sections of the session. Next, if you've called in with your phone, please switch your phone audio so that we're able to link your name to the phone number. That'll also help us understand where the questions are coming from so we connect them to the right name that is signed in here for today. And then lastly, use the chat to ask questions and present ideas. And then also, please make sure you mute yourself when you are not speaking. Okay. So once again, I'd like to thank you all for joining the Using Data Systems to Advance Early Childhood Program session. So we have three sets of presenters today for our 90-minute session. We'll start with Chris Myers from the Virginia Department of Education. Then we'll transition to Leslie Levy, Erica Kelly, and Whitty Palmer from the New Jersey Department of Education. And then lastly, we'll hear from Dr. Philip Sirenides from Penn State University at Harrisburg and the co-PI on the Early Childhood DataWorks project. So we've built in some time for some Q&A after each presenter, so feel free to type your questions in the chat, or you may also unmute yourself once we get to that point in the conversation. So before I turn it over to the state teams, we'd like to start with a quick poll to see where your state is in its ECIDS development. So an ECIDS is an Early Childhood Integrated Data Systems. So let me get that poll started, and it should indicate whether you've not started, you're in progress, or your ECIDS is operational. And so we'll just give a few moments for folks to respond to that. We've got about 35 that are participated, 35%. So we'll wait till that percentage gets up a little bit higher before we close that out. Although it looks like we're seeing trending about 78% in progress, 11% not started, and 11% operational. So we'll just give it another few seconds before we kick it off. Okay. We've got 100%, so we will share those results. So we've got 11% not started, 79% in progress, and 11% operational. So that's good to know as our presenters talk through the work that they're doing in their states and their programs. Okay. So I am now going to turn it over to Chris Myers in Virginia and let her share about the work that's happening there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Howard, and good afternoon, everyone. Glad to be here today to talk about what we're doing in Virginia. And if I had answered the poll, I would have been also in that in progress phase, which is where Virginia is. And so what I'm going to talk about in our short time right now is the data system that we're building to inform our new Unified Measurement and Improvement System, which is a piece of our ECIDS development. And so I'll mention a couple places how this data system is really crucial, but how it's sort of a part of some of the other ECIDS work that's going on today. So I hope during this presentation that you'll better understand how Virginia's data system is helping to connect and support our different communities of our childcare and early education providers to engage in our measurement and improvement. So I'm going to share a little bit of background about the need for our new unified system here in Virginia. then talk a fair amount about how we are really engaging and supporting the field with this Link B-5 data system and how that engagement is helping us really build and refine the system. And then I'll share a little bit at the end about how we're beginning to use our Link B-5 system for quality measurement and improvement, and how that's kind of laying the foundation to tie into the other ECIDS work. And then at the end, I've got a couple links and a handout that'll be some good information and resources that you can follow up on later as well. So I'll start with just a little background on the need for our unified system here in Virginia. Again, probably similar to what many of you have noted in your own states. Through our needs assessment, we have certainly recognized that our current system does not offer every child an equitable opportunity to succeed, and that this is both based on the quality early childhood experiences that we know are so important, but that many families and children lack equitable access to. And then we also, through our needs assessment, found that our system often fails to prepare children, particularly those who are Black, Hispanic, speak another language other than English, or have a diagnosed disability or developmental delay. And so our new unified system really is focused on ensuring that all of our children have access to quality teaching and learning that meets their unique needs. And so we're really coming together to unify around shared and equitable expectations for quality, to measure and strengthen our teacher-child interactions and curriculum in our publicly funded Birth to 5 programs, and improve the quality of the supports for our educators, using the data to really prioritize those who need it most. So this all led to some pretty important unification legislation that our governor signed back in July 2020. There were 3 components to that legislation. It moved the oversight of all early care and education to the Department of Ed. It established an early childhood advisory committee, and it legislated the creation of a unified measurement system. So that's really what I'm focused on today, and how the Link B-5 system is being used in our measurement and improvement system. The system was developed with lots of feedback from a variety of stakeholders. It includes 2 years of practice, which we have actually just started this year through our preschool development grant communities. And then the system is fully required for all publicly funded programs starting in the fall of 2023. So one of the links that we've shared is a link that goes into much more detail about all of the components of our VQB-5 and the unification efforts on our Department of Ed Building a Unified Early Childhood System website, because I won't go into all those details, but that's a good resource for you. So when we talk about our VQB-5, which is just our very short abbreviation for our Virginia Quality Birth to 5 Measurement and Improvement System, we know that that system can only be successful if we have accurate and comprehensive data inputs. And so we recognized that currently, or before this in Virginia, that the data collection that we were doing across our early childhood programs was very ad hoc, it was very inconsistent, and it was really difficult to combine data from different provider types, different sites, or different communities across the state. So really, there were many partners, but primarily the logistics of building this system were through our partnership with the University of Virginia. And we used a very field-driven approach to developing this new system, which we call Link B-5, standing for linking together the Birth to 5 communities. And then the feedback from our local communities and our educators statewide is truly informing the development process that I'll talk through in just a little bit. And then really improving the quality of that data that we get so that it is accurate and comprehensive in our new VQB-5 system. So just to sum it up, basically, when you hear me talk about Link B-5 or the Link B-5 data portal, Link B-5 is basically the website that we are using to collect information for the VQB-5 measurement system. And it's used to collect information at the community, the site, and the classroom level. And I'll touch on that in a little more detail and show some examples. But this Link B-5 system is being used to help communities and sites understand their VQB-5 ratings. It's being used to highlight the strengths of our early childhood teachers and leaders. It's being used to provide program leaders with data to help them better understand the strengths and needs within their own programs. And it's being used to provide our communities, our professional development organizations, professional development individuals like coaches with insight into specific program needs and statewide focus areas. So this is kind of a broad look at how we've gone about building this new Link B-5 data system. And so you can kind of see it's in 5 different stages for it to be fully developed. And so we actually started this work 2 years ago through the help of our preschool development grant. We called those the pilot year of our VQ-B-5 system. So they weren't the official practice year. We were still developing what those guidelines would be. But while we were doing that, we developed sort of a very basic, what we called a proof of concept system that was used to enter the data in that first year through Link B-5. And it just collected some basically point in time information. Then we refined that, added a few features in pilot year 2 to Link B-5. And then we really, and when I say we, I mean our University of Virginia partners, took a lot of time to take all the feedback and input gathered in those first 2 pilot years to do some pretty major revisions and really built a lot of the foundation that will help us grow this system and then also build it in a way that it can be linked with other data systems in the state to form the foundation for our ECIDS. So we are currently in what we call practice year 1 of our VQ-B-5 system. So it's still optional for programs to participate during these practice years. This is when we truly are using Link B-5 as the official website to enter the VQ-B-5 system in. We'll use some of the data and feedback we're getting this year to refine the system during our second practice year next year. And then by the year 2023, 2024, that's when that legislative requirement goes into effect, requiring all publicly funded programs to participate, and Link B-5 will be the home of that VQ-B-5 system. It's also just important to note that the University of Virginia also has and manages the website that houses our PALS pre-K system and our VKRP, which is our school readiness assessment used at kindergarten entry. And so through the development and being with the University of Virginia, there's a lot of sort of cross work going to make sure that these systems can eventually speak and work together, but currently they're still being managed separately. So I want to talk in this next section about how we've engaged and really supported the field with the data collection process. So Link B-5 has really grown quite rapidly, and this is truly because we've been growing through our community participation and collecting information across a very diverse set of communities. So really everything you see there that's in purple, whether it's the darkest purple to the lightest purple, all of those communities are now participating in our VQ-B-5 practice year and are in Link B-5. So that's about 85% of all the communities in Virginia are now participating. Those gray areas we will bring on next year, so we'll have 100% coverage. But just as many states, Virginia is very diverse. We have everything from suburban DC up in Northern Virginia to very rural Appalachian areas down in Southwest Virginia, but all of these communities are engaging with our data collection process. This just gives you a sense of the different types of programs participating. And so not only can you see the growth over the 3 years, but also the growth by family day homes that are participating and using the system, public school pre-K programs that are using the system, and center-based programs that are using the system. This also includes Head Start. Some of our Head Starts in Virginia are in public schools and some are licensed centers. So there's quite a broad group of different types of programs that are using the Link B-5 system. And then as far as how our Link B-5 system engages users, there are several different levels of users. It starts with our broad state team, which is the University of Virginia, the Department of Education, and then our partners at the Virginia Early Childhood Foundation. And then we identify those communities, and each community identifies their community leads. Those community leads then get the local sites to participate, and they set up site administrator users. The site administrators then set up their program profiles and invite teachers and teacher assistants to set up their profiles in Link B-5. And then the teachers enter the children information in what we call classroom lists. So children are not actually using the system, but children are represented in this classroom list function. And so each of these different levels of users have different levels of engagement in Link B-5. This is just an example of then what our community admin can see. And so this is that community lead role. And so when a community lead logs into Link B-5, they can see their total count of their participating sites. And then they can clearly see those different types of programs broken down there. We have separated the standalone centers versus affiliated. Affiliated are typically either like corporate centers or centers that are owned by where they have multiple locations, or perhaps a Head Start grantee that has multiple locations. But this gives them a clear view of who their community is and how many of these different program types are participating within their community. Then the piece that our community leads have really helped us build and are finding very useful is they have this dashboard that really helps them track the users and the level of engagement. So this is a snapshot that we took near the end of our registration phase. So usually earlier in the phase, you'd see a lot more yellow or red. This particular view is at the end of registration. So you can see there was lots of green, which is great. That means there was lots of completed profiles from everything at the site level to the classroom level. The teachers completed their own profiles. And those classroom lists were started. Again, this is just a sample one as well, but it gives you a sense of sort of how they can log in and track. Then they can filter and they can contact programs to remind them to engage, to reach out to them and to support them. Class observations, which we just started in the system, they can also track, and you can see the different colors there. So it's very easy for a community admin to keep an eye on how users are engaging in the system, and then how they can reach out and support them when there is a need to help engagement. So all of this is really reliant on creating a very supportive system, since our users are quite diverse and really range in their technological skills as well. And so our UVA team has developed a great system for outreach and technical assistance. And so we call this the little flower image, but it truly represents all the work that goes into supporting everyone with using this system, because it's so critical to the work that we're doing. You know, we have weekly updates where I attend office hours as well, and we help answer questions, and our Link B-5 team is there every single week. Before COVID, they were doing lots of community visits where they'd sometimes have spaghetti nights, and they'd bring in a bunch of teachers from the local community, and they'd sit down with them at computers and iPads and help them complete the process together as a team. They don't do that quite as much since COVID, but it is still an option. And then you can see some of the other pieces. The chat and the hotline have been really helpful, especially in this new phase that we just started. So some of this data is from last spring, but what we're hearing from folks is they love that on-demand chat feature and hotline feature that are available beyond just the typical workday into the evenings and on some hours on the weekend as well. So lots of support. And so the engagement that we have gotten with our system would not happen without this level of support by our Link B-5 team. So next, I'm just going to talk a little bit then about how this Link B-5 system is being used for quality measurement and improvement, knowing that we're really at the beginning stages of using it in our new system. And so we're very excited about the potential for having more data, but we're kind of, I'll talk through just sort of our early stages with this. So in our new VQ-B-5 system, it's an annual measurement cycle. And so our all those users that we talked about, the sites, the teachers, they're engaging with the system basically on an annual cycle with Link B-5. And so they start in the summer with what we call the registration phase. And this is when sites who right now are volunteering to participate, they register within the Link B-5 portal. They register by the site first, and then the site admin invites the teachers. It's also used besides just the participation piece for our teacher recognition incentive. And so by registering in the system, that's where we have the information about the teachers who qualify to receive that recognition program. Then registration closes in mid-September, and we move into the fall data entry phase. And so this is where we start to gather the information about the classrooms and the classroom quality data. So for our measurement system, that's primarily our class observations, which happen in every single classroom and family day home, infant, toddler, and pre-K. And they enter information about curriculum, but they're also entering some other just general information about their classroom, the type of funding they receive, a little bit about their hours, teachers' education level, just some more general information so that as we track data and link with other systems, we'll have a really complete profile of what those classrooms look like and what children are experiencing. That's also the phase when the classroom lists get entered, so the names of the children get entered in the fall. That runs through about mid-December, then the system closes for a little bit and then it reopens for the spring phase, which right now is towards the end of January, so it's a pretty long spring phase through June. There's a second round of classroom quality data that's entered. It's not as in-depth as the fall data entry. That's when most of the data is entered, but we do get a second class observation for every classroom, and those scores are entered in the spring. And if there are any updates to the information, so if a program's using a new curriculum or if teachers' names have changed, there's a chance in the spring for them to update that. Then we at the Department of Ed, we will use the classroom quality data that was entered in the fall and the spring for all the sites that were officially registered, and that'll be used to calculate their quality ratings. And then the cycle will continue each year, and we'll continue to use the fall and the spring data. So the data that's being entered in Link B-5 will not just be data that we're using to measure and determine the quality ratings, it will also be extremely useful in supporting our improvement efforts. And so the Link B-5 system will really be what we use to collect and consolidate that program information about quality teaching and learning, really honing in on teacher-child interactions and curriculum use. So at the educator level, because we're doing that fall and that spring cycle that I just talked about with data collection, it also means that our educators are receiving frequent feedback about their strengths and opportunities for improvement. And that way we can support them with their individual needs to strengthen their teaching practice. The data that we're entering is also available to those site administrators so that the program leaders themselves have pretty much immediate access to their data to use to help deepen their understanding of the strengths and the needs within their program. So they are able to export and view, and we assist them with understanding their own program data to identify strengths and needs. And then the data is being used. Community leads can see their community and get a snapshot at the community level. We also are able to share the data with professional development organizations, with our coaches, so that they can all have insight not only into individual program needs, but it also will give us a chance to look at statewide focus areas and trends. So that is pretty much the overview. What I wanted to highlight here at the end is just a great website and resources for additional information. And this website, we're adding information to it all the time. And so the linkb5.virginia.edu is the website that is truly the login for our programs to go to. But if you click on the Link B-5 resources tab, it opens up all of these resources that are publicly available. There's a short YouTube video that our partners at UVA put together to talk about why the Link B-5 system, and that's the video we use to share with the programs that are participating. So if you're interested in seeing that, there are some informational flyers, and then you can really see at every level the types of data and the step-by-step directions that we give to our community leads, site administrators, family day home providers, and teachers. There's also a flyer that our UVA team just put together that's more of the broad overview about the Link B-5 system that I believe will also get entered in the chat box as well. So with that, I will pause and see if there are any questions before we move on to our next section.
Great, thanks, Chris. Yeah, so I'd like to definitely open it up to anyone on the that's on today. If they have any questions that they would like to either type in the chat for Chris, or if they want to come off mute. Now is a great opportunity to ask Chris any questions regarding her experience in developing and implementing Link B-5. And actually, I have a question, Chris, if no one has one yet while they're thinking. Sure. What advice do you have? So we saw a variety of states that were either in progress or not started, but what advice would you give to states that are just starting their work in developing in ECIDS, and what kind of advice would you give to them in regards to starting?
Great question. I think what we have learned, or what's been really valuable for us that I'm really glad we did, is take it sort of step by step. And so by creating that proof of concept first and not getting too far ahead of ourselves, it really gave us the chance to kind of trial and error a few things before we started to build things in at a much more complicated and more costly level. And so by having that initial phase, that helped us. And then the second piece is just this constant back and forth feedback with the field, and really, really learning from exactly what's happening on the ground, what's working well for people, what do they need, what's not working, et cetera.
Great, thank you, Chris. So we do have a few questions coming in. How is home visiting considered in this model, and are there plans to extend beyond pre-K?
So home visiting right now is not a part of our current VQB-5 system directly. So we're looking at the programs that are providing more of the early education and infant, toddler, preschool classrooms and early education settings. We're certainly, some of our partnerships are involving and talking more with the home visiting piece. So I think that would come at a much later phase. So right now that's not a part. And then extending beyond pre-K, there are some initial conversations at the Department of Ed about possibly linking again with our system of student identification numbers and all of those pieces. We just really finished the transitioning of all the early care system over to the Department of Ed. So we are now officially, since July, a birth to 12 system at the Department of Ed. And so those conversations are really, really at the early stages, but we are informing them and letting them know what we're doing with Link B-5 with all the data people to hopefully make those connections down the road.
Right, and related to that, there was a follow-up question on Part B and C services.
So there are, and I hope I don't get this wrong because I'm not the early childhood special ed expert, but we do include our early childhood special ed programs and have some that are currently participating. I can't remember exactly whether that's including all of our Part B and C services, but our special ed classrooms are included in the system.
All right, and we have one last question that I think we have time for. As you build components of the system, how do you track information on the whole system? Is not all providers are using the system?
So right now, we can really track it by those that are participating, but we're also, like with this round that we just had for the practice year registration, we can pull the list of who's participating. And then we're now comparing that to our list, broader list of all of our publicly funded licensed school-based programs to see who's not participating. And again, the legislation will require in the next year and a half that they do have to participate. So that will kind of be our next phase, is to make sure that all the programs that are legislatively required are in the system. And then the others will continue to have the option to participate. So we'll just be able to track those that opt into the system.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. We appreciate you sharing this wealth of information from Virginia and the Link B-5 system. We're now going to transition to New Jersey, and Erica is going to kick us off talking about the New Jersey Easel program.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Erica Kelly, and I am the project sponsor for New Jersey's Early Childhood Integrated Data System. I am here this afternoon with Leslie Levy, who is our Senior Project Manager, and Reedy Parmer, who is our Business Analyst. And just in regards to the poll, if we were to have participated in the poll, we would have selected operational. And just before we get started, Chris, thank you for a great presentation and congrats on having 85% of your communities participating. And I'm sure you guys won't have any trouble reaching 100% by next year. So we are going to get started today. Like Chris with Virginia, we are going to start off with a background about NJ Easel, our approaches to developing and implementing our system, some challenges and strategies, and then we'll show you some of our reports and then some final takeaways in the form of our best practices statement. So just some of our goals for NJ Easel, which stands for the New Jersey Enterprise Analysis System for Early Learning, is to integrate data from 4 partnering agencies. We have 4 agencies that have data with our system. We also started the system to be able to respond to critical questions about early care and education. And then one of the other most critical parts that we're most proud of is being able to produce reports that can speak to the efficiency and efficacy of our early childhood programs. Again, just a little bit of background. New Jersey Council for Young Children is a governor-appointed early childhood advisory council, which was started in 2010. And with the council, we had several committees, one of which was the data committee. And the data committee was responsible for coming up with a set of questions that we wanted answered in regards to our early childhood programs. And that was the catalyst for starting NJ Easel. Funding for the project came from grants. The first one was our Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge grant, where we received about $5 million, and that allowed us to launch phase 1. And then our preschool development grant, Birth Through 5, our initial planning grant, where we received about 1.4 million, and then our renewal grant, which we had 7.3 million.
Hi, everyone. I'm Leslie Levy. I'm the Senior Project Manager. I was looking for the unmute. Thank you, Erica, for getting us started. I am so excited to share about NJ Easel, and this slide may look familiar to some folks who maybe have been to some workshops about ECIDS, because the rainbow is something that we learned about back in 2015 at a strategy session. And it's really the perfect way for us to show the comprehensive picture of what NJ Easel is all about. The rainbow colors are the types of data that we are pulling together, child, family, classroom, program, and workforce data. And we actually have 15 disparate systems identified that are to be integrated into NJ Easel. And as Erica said, this is a cross-agency collaboration. We have Department of Education, Children and Families, Human Services, and Health participating and contributing data. The Office of Information Technology here in New Jersey is building our data warehouse and is doing the integration. And we're so excited to be able to get this data about the children's different early care and education programs so that we can answer some of these questions, which Reedy will talk a little bit more about in just a minute. The reports, you'll see some mock-up reports at the end. They're de-identified, they're aggregated counts of children participating in different programs based on matching their identifiable individual information. Phase 1 went live in 2018, as Erica said. We have the student data from DOE, and then we have the DHS data, which is child care subsidies. And so we're thrilled to get that off the ground, and we are in the midst of phase 2, which is bringing on our other 2 partners, DOH and DCF, bringing on birth record data, and then 2 systems, home visiting systems. So let me move on. In order to make this whole thing work, we have a great data governance structure in place, and this data governance model has really driven how we could be successful. The Early Learning Commission and Interdepartment Planning Group were actually organizations put together prior to NJ Easel. They were put together based on an executive order. And then to get NJ Easel moving, we put together a steering committee, which is providing direction, and we meet regarding status and get decisions made. Our Policy and Data Governance Council has been so valuable in coming up with the standards and working on the data sharing agreements and the different documentation that's required for a system of this size. The functional team is amazing because each of these 15 systems has a group of programmers, technical people, and business people, and we worked together to learn the requirements of what we were going to build before we got started. And then, of course, our technical team from the Office of Information Technology. So I'm now going to turn it over to Reedy to talk a little bit more about the questions and objectives.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Leslie. I'm just going to dive into the questions and objectives that which Erica has mentioned. So what with NJ Easel, we are lucky enough that we had questions defined in order to drive this project. So altogether, we have 11 questions and 53 objectives, which are focuses on children, program, and workforce. So in our phased approach for phase 1, we are addresses multiple critical questions about children. And for phase 2, we are enhancing our reporting capability with more data, including the data about children, trying to answer the fully question of which was covered by phase 1. And also we are trying to answer some of the questions related to programs. And with that approach for phase 3, we are expected to enhance the reporting, what was part of phase 1, phase 2, and we will also target to answer the questions regarding the workforce. So that basically is the structure that we follow for our NJ Easel phased approach. Can we move to the next? Okay. So this is the slide. This is a very, very important slide that shows the whole project in a nutshell. You can see there are blue boxes and green boxes. The blue boxes represents the business processes, and the green boxes shows all the technical processes. And as you can see, there is an interaction between them at any major processes. So this is how we maintain our stakeholder engagement for any feedback, approval, concerns, or any kind of questions that we have throughout the project. And also, if you can see that red arrow, which shows how the whole NJ Easel works. Basically, it started from the questions and objective, which NJCYC had defined. And at the end, we have NJ Easel reports, which shows the count of children associated with all questions and objectives, which we are trying to answer. And those counts are the identified aggregated counts, as Leslie mentioned. Can we move to the next process? Okay, so this is the slide that shows the measurable indicators. So many of these measurable indicators are aligned with the New Jersey's PDG B-5 needs assessment. And this measurable indicators are defined health-related conditions and social, emotional, and situational condition for NJ Easel reporting. So they are part of question 1A and 1B. So you can see that in phase 1, we are trying to answer some of the objectives, threat related to social, emotional, and situational conditions. And in phase 2, we are adding more conditions. Top of that, we are adding the health-related conditions, which is coming from, we have 3 more systems we integrated for phase 2 home visiting and 1 health system, which helps us getting data about health-related system. And for future planning, we are trying to answer fully, adding more conditions to it. And our NJ Easel reports are not limited to these conditions only. We have more objectives that we are covering in our reporting, which is not here, but I'm just presenting the measurable indicators, which is tied to the conditions. Next. Okay, so this is the slide that shows that how many documents are involved in throughout this process. As you can see, from 2014, 2021, we evolved. We have so many documentations that helps us manage, monitor, and drive this whole project. And if I take an example, there is You can see data governance plan, which is a very important aspect of our project, which Leslie mentioned that it really helps organize this project for requirements, for decisions, for teams and stuff. So if you can see, we developed that document in 2016. So it's recommended that we derive these documents ahead of the time, which can help us drive the project. So that's a slide that shows the documentation. Now I'm going to transfer it to Leslie, which she'll explain all the challenges and strategies that we have with our project. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Reedy. There we go. For those of you who are currently in progress with your ECIDS or just getting ready to start or are operational, I'm sure some of these challenges you're aware of. And so we'll walk through them. The stakeholder management is I think one of the biggest challenges. And when you're doing an integrated data system and you're pulling data from multiple agencies, you're talking about coordinating, this cross-agency coordination. Being in government, we have administration changes, we have resource turnover, and when you have so many people involved in a project, there are different perceptions and expectations. So the key for us to strategize to address this was in establishing a cross-agency collaboration. From a documentation standpoint, the slide you just saw from Reedy, we have an Easel SharePoint, which is available to all the folks involved in the teams in order to localize the documentation for use. The data governance plan, as Reedy said, was key because it really provides the guidance for the governing of the project. To address the cross-agency coordination, we have standing meetings set up. I mean, structure is just so important on a project that's so large. And then, of course, transparency and communication when you're trying to do a project like this, keeping the communication open. Plus, these are ongoing large projects, so positivity definitely helps as you're moving along. Data sharing agreements, if you haven't done them yet, be prepared. They take a lot of time. You've got multiple authoritative resources, various privacy requirements, but again, we went the route of collaboration. We created collaborative data sharing agreements. We leveraged existing New Jersey state templates, and many other states were willing to share their templates to help us, don't start on a blank page. There's so much that's out there that can help you get going. We brought the agency attorneys into our sessions for drafting, which really helped to get their feedback early in the process. And when you have multi-agency, which have many different statutes, looking at the agency with the strictest requirements is a good idea. Of course, what are we doing? We're integrating data. So many decisions have to be made about the data in terms of how are we going to do the matching? How is Johnny Jones from this system, this agency? Are we sure it's the same Johnny Jones from this system, this agency? So there's a lot of decisions have to be made. Data granularity, are we going to report fiscal year, calendar year? How are we going to look at the programs? Every agency seems to do that differently. It's all about coordinating the consensus, working together to work through the decisions of this is for Easel, this is for the state that we're trying to do this. And so we'd have targeted requirement sessions where we would bring all the right people. We bring our functional team folks, our IT folks, and the program people together in our multi-agency joint application development JAD sessions, where we would work through all this to come to a consensus. So I'm now going to turn it over to the probably biggest challenge, which is sustainability, and let Erica go with that one.
Thank you, Leslie. So sustainability, that's definitely a huge challenge. As we mentioned before, Easel is a multi-million-dollar project. So when we think about when our grants end, how are we going to sustain the project? That is certainly something that we have been thinking about from the inception of the project. Also, just because we have so many stakeholders, just how do we keep them engaged and ensuring that Easel stays as a priority and that it is a focus for New Jersey. Again, we have been fortunate that we had the Race to the Top funding opportunity. We also had the preschool development grant birth through 5, 2 rounds of that. We are meeting with our interdepartment planning group, which is made up of our administrators across early care and education. And we're having continuous talks about what we can do to strategize to sustain the project. Some ideas have been to have each state partner contribute funding to the project. Ultimately, our goal would be to get a line item budget in the state's budget. Just when we think about the different phases that we've had so far and where we're going, so phase 1 and phase 2, we're now looking at phases 3 and 4. Of course, these are contingent upon future funding. As Leslie talked about earlier, phase 3 is about adding the workforce, and phase 4 is about adding assessments with the Department of Health. And then one of the things that we are most proud of is being able to generate reports. So we are going to show you just 2 mock-up reports, mock-up meaning that this is, it isn't factual data, but this first report, I'm not sure how much you can see, but it lists the crossover counts of children participating in identified sub-programs by specific social, emotional, and situational conditions. And then the next one is also one that we're excited about. It has unduplicated count of children that are participating in identified programs statewide. And then I know we covered a lot, but just some takeaways, which we have here as a best practices statement is, again, New Jersey is all about integrating data from our 4 different data systems. And while there were a number of reasons why we have been successful, 4 that we have pointed out, again, is the initial development of the questions by the New Jersey Council for Young Children, strong data governance. And with the strong data governance, I would also point out having a great senior project manager and a business analyst to be able to keep all these parts moving. Again, cross-agency collaboration and continuous stakeholder engagement. We have our contact information here. If you ever need to reach out to us, again, as Leslie stated, there's no reason to create a lot of these documents from scratch. We're definitely more than willing to share a lot of the templates that we have. So if you have any questions for us, we'd be more than willing to answer them. Thank you, Terry. Aspirations. All right, well, thank you all.
Did you see the question from Jen Gilpin? How does Head Start, Early Head Start fit in? Have you developed data sharing agreements with these agencies?
Hi, this is Leslie. At this moment, our school student data that comes into our system has some, and Reedy, correct me if I'm wrong on this, has some Head Start data in it, but very limited. And that's because that data system has very limited Head Start data in it. So it is definitely in the plan to include this type of data, but it's not easily accessible, and no, in terms of NJ Easel, we don't have data sharing agreements set up with them at this moment.
So I'm back. My internet dropped for a minute, but I apologize, but I'm back on. So Leslie, I see another question that came in. How large of a team does it require to maintain the database?
Oh, the database. Okay. Our Office of Information Technology team is, I mean, I'm counting the modeling team, the business analyst through all the way through the DBAs through to the business objects, which is the tool we use for reporting, is a total of 13. But that's to do the whole process. For the maintenance standpoint, because we are in the process of doing phase 2 and maintaining phase 1, we have the whole team. So I expect that at the point in time where it's just maintenance and support, it can certainly be accomplished with not as many folks that we have going right now.
How often does your interagency group meet?
Okay, I believe we're talking about the interdepartment group,
Yeah.
and that is on a monthly basis. Correct, Erica? Yes, they meet on a monthly basis. Technology. What is the
Yeah, what is the underlying technology being used?
we use the tool Data Stage, and which also includes Quality Stage, which is used in our matching process. So it's Oracle based. Hopefully that's enough.
And for Virginia, we would have to email the Link B-5 team to find out for sure, but it's been built by a local vendor, Tech Dynamism. So I think it's a built from scratch system, but I'm not sure.
And then we had another question come in about, does New Jersey host this on prem or in cloud?
It's on premises right now. Right, and I see you have a question about the CEDS, so I'm going to let Reedy answer that question. Did you see that, Reedy?
Yes, I saw it. Okay, so you said given the number of data systems. So we use CEDS. In fact, I use CEDS to align the data. What happens is like we have a data coming from the multiple system and they define differently. Maybe they have a different definition. Maybe they have a similar definition. So we get the data element, I map that, I align that data element with all the other system using CEDS. And I largely use CEDS for any definition or any kind of a standardized definition that requires standardized elements that we required for our Easel to go forward. So with CEDS, I really take their help to define the terms. And then once I get that information into Easel, go to different agency, ask their permission, approval, their modifications, and that's how we made up our definitions. In fact, we just happened to finalize our definition for all conditions, which you just saw on the measurable indicator slide with the help of NJCYC Data Committee and the CEDS and all the other research. So that's how we do it.
Right, thanks, Reedy.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Howard, there were two questions for New Jersey a little bit earlier. I mean, for Virginia a little bit earlier. I don't know if you want to go back to tackle them now.
Sure, they dropped out of my chat.
Yeah, I got them here. So the first question was from Cynthia. Thoughts about linking to birth certificate data eventually for those born in Virginia?
Yes, and sorry I missed that. At this point, we have not started that conversation. We're really just starting with the entering of the basic children's names and birth dates, like a typical class list would be entered for our public school programs. But down the road, we might certainly talk more about that.
And then there was a second question, another question from Alicia. Do the UVA partners host the system, including the chat function, or are other entities involved in supporting various features?
Yes, sorry, I hit the wrong response for the chat and it went right to Alicia instead of to everyone, but UVA is the host and they are the ones who manage the chat system.
Thank you, guys.
Great, thanks, Richard, for catching those. Thoughts from either state on biggest cost items to date? So maybe New Jersey, if you want to tackle that one first.
I think the biggest cost item to date is really coming from our Office of Information Technology covering those costs because we do have 13 people. And the, the costs go up and down depending on where we are in the development process. Once we went live though, because we're live in production, and our maintenance and support is to catch us up each year with the yearly data of the systems that are already live while we're doing all the building for phase 2. So it is a big chunk of the grant money.
In ours, is in an earlier stage, but I'd say sort of the bigger chunks when we moved from this sort of proof of concept to the more permanent system is to build a system that can maintain data year after year and can self-populate some items again, and then having all those different user capabilities and with all the sort of different functions of who can see what and what that means for multiple different types of users. And then the third piece that I've heard us talk a lot about that is the cost piece is building in some more advanced capabilities to run different types of data reports. So right now we can export some data, but to really build in more, functional data reporting capabilities, that was sort of our next big cost phase.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you so much, Leslie, Rudy, and Erica for responding to those questions. We're going to move on to the next section part of our presentation. I know we have one more question, but we're going to hold on that. Maybe it could be answered in the chat. But I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Philip Serenides and let him discuss his section.
Thanks, Howard. It's great to be with this panel presenting. I'm going to share, if I can here. Let's see, share screen. All right. Hi, my name is Phil Serenides. I am from Pennsylvania. If I were to fill out the poll from the beginning, I would say non-applicable, but with some closure issues, because I used to work within the Pennsylvania Early Childhood Office from 2009 to 2011 as the research director, and helped with part of that team that launched Pennsylvania's integrated early childhood data system, and have since been very excited to work and partner with states doing that work. I am now at Penn State, and I direct an institute which focuses on state policy, and I'm co-investigator of the ECDataWorks project, which I will speak a little bit about on this presentation, which flows, I think, from the last two nicely, because one of the slides from the New Jersey presentation showed sort of a process flow that goes from questions and data needs through many meetings and mock-ups that leads to a final report. And then there was that red arrow that sort of arched the entire process that made sure that the report at the end was connected to the initial question at the beginning that needed some actionable information. And so that's a challenging task, and one that I'll be talking a little bit about. My talk is in three sections. The first is thinking about the need for effective solutions for analyzing and sharing data. In order for us to be able to deliver on the vision for ECIDS and what data can do for policy and practice, we certainly need to develop and use effective strategies for analyzing, sharing data. And there are many good examples of states that are doing so. I'll change my setup here. All right. Secondly, one reason why states struggle is that often our data goals are broad and non-specific. And so we have so many interests and ideas that it can be challenging for us to remain focused and think about a specific use case. That'll be my second point. And then finally, I just want to think a little bit about what a tool design process might look like that embeds strategic planning and stakeholder engagement to ensure that the reports and data tools that you're developing will be effective and useful and used. As I mentioned, the ECDataWorks project I'm representing, and we have all sorts of materials and activities and resources available through our website and other means, so I invite you to check that out. And that's going to be my plug. So to make data dreams a reality, states that have an ECIDS also need these solutions for sharing data. I apologize if this has been presented by someone else as part of this sort of larger event, but I do want to draw your attention to one of the many resources that have come out recently from the PDG B-5 TA Center. And this one looks specifically at how states are making progress in their data system development. And here's the cover for it and a reference. One of the principal findings of this report is that states are in many different stages of system design, development, and implementation. And so one way to think about that in Exhibit A are these 4 basic stages. Are you at the planning stage, building? Are you maintaining, or are you really focused now on using an operational data system? And it's certainly the case states are at many different stages. In addition, when we look at the activities that are supported by the PDG B-5 efforts, there are different types of data system activities. One would be those things that are driven directly out of sort of the guidance and sort of the state plans. These are things that are fundamental to sort of implementing the PDG B-5 state plans. Then there are capacity building activities, which are related and are thinking more long-term about, beyond the grant, how will these activities be sustained? And there are many innovations that are taking place. And as we looked across and interviewed many of the states that are doing this, some of you here participated in those interviews, thank you. It was the case we found that all of these different activities were present at each of the 4 different stages of system development. And that was an exciting finding because it really showed all the diversity of activity that's going on. In that top row, 15 states are using this opportunity to establish governance and data sharing. 6 are assigning unique IDs and matching algorithms. 8 are now working on integrating new data sources, having already sort of started with 2 or 3. And 7 grantees are taking now those integrated data systems and launching reports and data tools. On the capacity building side, some states were early and needed to coordinate their interagency planning. Some were trying to modernize their platforms. Terry from Kansas was asking about cloud, based solutions. That certainly is one of the things that is happening right now. We're seeing that shift and migration. Those that had systems in place already were really trying to promote their organizational learning and support for their data systems. And finally, there were some that were really on the data literacy and data use side and working toward that. Finally, in the bottom row, there were states that were now going back and trying to streamline and sort of replan and revise their whole data ecosystem, having some systems in place, but realizing that they needed to go back and to make some changes to how they've been developing their system thus far. And that leads to reimagining how these systems will be used, emphasizing scalability, sustainability, and then focusing on continuous use. In the report, all of these are described, and if that's of interest to you, I recommend going and taking a look. Those are specific examples, and I want to share some other specific examples about the progress that's being made by many states in order to develop and use their integrated data systems. These screenshots come from Texas, where they've developed a expanded school readiness report. And the intent here was that they were hoping to shift the conversation around school readiness from just focusing on kindergarten entry, assessment scores, to thinking about this 3-tiered view of ready schools, ready communities, ready kindergartners. It's consistent with what many other states are also doing. And this tool is now live and is assisting the state in planning professional development across their early elementary and also community-based early learning settings, where they can use information from both directions to have better planning for the professional development needs of those professionals. And that's just an exciting real use case for how early learning integrated data is being used. Another example, it comes from Utah, and this again is a real live tool that has been presented on at conferences like this. The interest in Utah was to take and leverage their integrated data so that it can be provided to communities that are at different stages of planning or implementing local engagement and development activities, right? Some are just trying to coordinate, some are building out their capacity, some are hoping to evaluate how they're doing. And because there are many different community questions and needs, Utah developed a community profile that had a different design framework. In Texas, it was ready communities, ready schools, ready students. In Texas, their framework was to think about sort of curating data based on the categories of eligibility, access, services, and impact. And this has led to a more efficient statewide planning of resources as local communities are using this data. And indeed, they have found that when moving to a distinct count and providing that in the report, they are having a better understanding of the community needs and the community capacity to meet those needs. So if you're interested in the expanded school readiness report, ECDataWorks has a lot of materials. We've developed sort of information about the framework, a TA guide, a call to action, and there's videos. And of course, there's all the same for the Utah community profile. So there's lots of resources that demonstrate, you can go to the website, the exciting work that states are doing to analyze and share data. And if you go to the website, you can find out about other activities and even see a video here, which I think some people on this particular session were a part of. I won't play the whole thing.
People have always known that for young children, you can't separate education from health, from family support.
Well, then we have to look at data, from all the programs in order to discover what type of outcome or what type of impact that we've made.
But we realized for many states working on that collecting data is not the same as understanding it. And so now we're moving into a place that not only provides us with tools and strategies for understanding the data that's being collected, but for actually leveraging that for some positive change.
We recognize we have a lot of information. We now have the ability to link it up, and we have increasing pressures for accountability. So it's the perfect storm.
All right, I'm going to stop it there and continue on with the second point here. So one reason that we struggle to make progress is that our data use goals sometimes can be broad and unspecified. And that is in part because I think that there are so many applications and possible uses for these systems that we want to sort of list them all. But use cases are one solution for how to handle that. Because it forces people to come together and really articulate not only what the question is and come to an understanding of shared information needs, but how that data will be used. So use cases can be a term used in the IT development process that really is focused on testing whether or not the business requirements have been satisfied. But our field has sort of grabbed onto this term to think about it much more broadly and operationalize the information needs and uses. And there are many benefits to having a use case because it, as I said, can articulate what those information needs are and have that be something that multiple people in a community of stakeholders can contribute to. But we can also use those to align our questions with policy, to identify areas where we want to take action or we need to. It can help us prioritize what data elements or system enhancements are needed in order to make those use cases feasible for our reports, as well as just simply communicating with our leadership, with our stakeholders, and engaging with our technical teams. So there are many positives that can come from just using use case as a heuristic for organizing the conversation and sort of the activity in developing these tools. So one obvious use case that I think has emerged was as a result of 2020, there was a need to better understand where there are services, specifically childcare, who's open, those types of things. And then that expanded to thinking more about food and sort of programs, food and nutrition programs for families and children, thinking about vaccinations and more. And 2020 was a year of unprecedented change that revealed a lot about the limitations of our systems. It also was a year of growth, where we were responding to tackle new challenges. And part of that was we had urgent use cases that became things that we could no longer ignore. And so those information needs then really focused activity in many ways. And I just invite you to think about how your state responded to the challenges of the shutdown and the ongoing pandemic, and what new tools have been developed as a result, and what capacities you've been able to also develop that will hopefully help you better respond in the future to emergencies. As I've asked these questions and had conversations, it's what I've heard is one of the things that have really been valuable is that there's been greater cross-agency collaboration, stakeholder engagement. There's been just a lot of engagement around data, and that has been one of the benefits. It was because we had to do so. And I think as states are now continuing to sort of build out their systems, it will be important, hopefully, to maintain that sense of urgency, but also those connections and sense of buy-in as we respond to emerging needs. So as I said, what accounts for the success? Well, states that were able to sort of leverage their data assets were in a position to respond to many of those pressing data needs. And so states that had an ECIDS or were planning that work and were ready to launch were particularly successful in being able to quickly turn around tools, websites, dashboards that met those use case needs. And that is now something that hopefully that momentum will continue. The success is leadership was involved, there was a lot of engagement, and there was that sense of urgency. So you can tell now I'm on my third color, so it must be my third point, which is to maximize the impact of these data efforts. We need to think about tool design as a very focused and separate activity, even apart from the system design and integration of data. And as we construct data tools or dashboards or various visualizations and products that are leveraging the integrated data systems, it will be helpful to try to not only have a use case that serves as a vehicle for our conversation and planning and activity, but to embed a facilitation of stakeholder engagement and ongoing strategic planning through the design process. And so this is now trying to move our tool and report development out of a sort of rapid, let's get the data out there and then decide what we're going to do with it, to thinking long-term and thinking strategically about how these tools will be used now, but also over the long term. And that means sort of building resiliency factors into our tool design process. So as we progress from early design to more purposeful use, certainly use cases can help ground the conversations and system work so that we have confidence our tools will be meeting the informational needs of stakeholders. But we also need operational, or organizational, and professional supports, and a process that can build in various factors of resiliency. What does that mean, resiliency factor? It can mean many things. I'll give you four. One is maximizing the appropriate involvement of ECIDS community members. Early childhood is very good at stakeholder engagement, but engaging stakeholders for the development of an analytic tool is kind of a dubious task, and is not always, it's not always helpful to do the same types of facilitation techniques of early and often trying to get everybody maximize involvement, get everyone at the table. Because we've seen in many cases that can lead to fatigue or people frustrated that they don't see progress or don't know what their role is. So having that appropriate involvement of stakeholders is one of the ways that you can make sure that your tool design process is going to be effective. A second is appropriately defining success for your system. It's very exciting to think about the huge policy decisions that may be made, but what are some of the operational or sort of short-term opportunities to leverage the data for some of the day-to-day decision-making? And then thinking about those as wins on your path. Reevaluating the positionality of ECIDS. Is it a technical task, or is it owned primarily by one agency or organization? And making sure that you have a multidisciplinary team supporting it, but also that shared ownership. It's going to give you resiliency through various ups and downs. And that's going to happen. Those challenging conditions will occur as you have stop-start funding, staff turnover, et cetera. If any of these four are interesting, or all of them are, you can go and listen to a podcast, because each of them are a focus of a separate ECDataWorks podcast. So now I'm just going to talk very briefly about a summary of a stakeholder engagement model that we've used at the ECDataWorks project. You will probably see things that you recognize that you're also doing, and this is something that we've found to be very successful. So we begin with just four basic tasks in sequence of establishing a goal statement, developing a use case, then moving to a conceptual mock-up, and finally going to a tool demonstration. This is very, I think this maps very nicely onto the New Jersey Easel process that was shown in their presentation. An important thing for us was to think about what happens in between each of those stages. And so after we have a goal statement identified, we then went out and surveyed various stakeholders in what we called an information needs assessment, which was a broader look at who's using data, how are they using it, what data do they wish they had? If they did so, how would they use it? And that's also an opportunity for us to do a data discovery. This happens before we move on to use cases, because we want to make sure that those use cases are informed by a broader group, and that they're feasible given the current data that exists within the state systems. Following the use case, we did more community outreach, which was important for us to then understand if our use case would actually have impact. And we then also did a technology assessment, being that we were an external partner. Moving to then developing a conceptual mock-up. That then requires some development, some user acceptance testing, and some sustainability planning that was part of our finalization of the tool. Throughout those tasks, we really did try to make sure we had diverse stakeholders that were engaged at the right times, and making sure we were building that sense of buy-in and collective sense of ownership as we scaffolded through. So that's going to come through. And so I'll give you a quick little second video.
The COVID-19 pandemic showed us quite a few things about early childhood data. Literally overnight, families' environments changed. So it could be that their childcare center shut down, maybe they weren't going to work, but for those essential employees that still had to report to work, many times they did not have a childcare environment to be able to serve their needs.
The pandemic showed us that we definitely had gaps in what information was available to people who needed it in an emergency situation. So we realized we were missing information that can help parents find childcare really quickly that meets their needs. Namely, information about available seats and whether childcare providers were open or closed or temporarily closed. This was all something that frontline workers needed access to quickly as public schools were shutting down and their care arrangements became more unstable.
The pandemic has really been an opportunity for us to start opening doors to some of these data silos, to really examine where we are not sharing data, but we should be, responsibly sharing data for the good of the people that data represents, right? If we can know more about the whole experience that people are having in their lives, we can see where there are opportunities for us to do better in terms of breaking down the bureaucratic barriers that might exist. I really think a lot of people who care choose to work in state and local government. We are there to serve the public. We're there to serve the greater good, and that was really evident in this particular time of crisis. Everybody that I was in contact with just really wanted to fully apply themselves to take these small actions that we can take that we hoped would potentially have bigger impacts in helping people who are struggling with the pandemic. In Minnesota, I know that we hit some roadblocks getting the PEBT program up and running. So that's a program that identifies.
Oh, sorry. I was going to check the chat and that ended my
eligible to
ended the slide, but we can continue. So here are the three main points that I was hoping to sort of share. One is that once we have made some progress toward the development of our integrated data systems, there is sort of a related but separate conversation about how then we can leverage those data, those resources for positive change, for decision making, for policy and operations, for strategic planning, for quality improvement, for program efficiency, for accountability, for all of these things that data can do. And in order to make those data dreams a reality, we have to develop the analytic and solutions for understanding and reporting those data. And one challenge to that is it can be a trap to have 100 research questions, or to have a sense that we'll make the data available first and then decide how we're going to use it later. The field of dreams fallacy. So by putting in some front-end effort to be specific in our data use goals, we can make a lot of early progress, and hopefully it will give us a better result. And use cases are a simple way of doing that. And then finally, as states are beginning to launch new tools, and it's a renaissance of data analytics, as I look across the country, we are now able to consider our tool design process as something that perhaps maybe hasn't been fully conceptualized or thought through. And so embedding strategic planning and our stakeholder engagement intentionally as essential parts of any tool design process will help us to do a better job at planning and stakeholder engagement, but also to help us make progress on creation of those tools. And just quickly, a fourth point here is, in order to continue the progress that we're making, it's going to be important for us to build the capacity, which I'm happy to see that there was 13 FTEs in New Jersey. That sounds right to me, right? And there's probably more than that are all supporting the work. This is work that's done by people. And so it's very important for us to make sure we're investing in and making sure we have the adequate team capacity to be successful, the commitment, and then finally the resiliency. And resiliency is something that speaks to the fact that we're not going to solve all the problems ever. Some things are inherent tensions to the work, and instead we need to become accustomed to working in a space that is changing, where we have emerging use case needs constantly, where we have cross-agency relationships that we need to invest in and nurture to make sure that they're always going to be productive, and much more. So there's a lot of investment that needs to take place, not just once, but in an ongoing way. So finally, to continue progress, as I mentioned, we have these areas, and I will ask you a question. Feel free to ask me a question, but I would like to know, among those who are participating, what accounts for the success that you have had, and also what would you do differently? And then part of that is an interest in knowing how we can be better prepared going forward. And so focusing on the tool design process and launching various resources for leadership or for your team or for the public to gain access to data and then begin to use it, I'm interested to know where there have been successes or what you might do differently. So thank you for your time. And I will turn things back to Howard for questions.
Right. So I just want everyone feel free to type any questions into the chat or feel free to unmute yourself. I do see one that came in, Phil. So Phil, question came in that did any of the states you talked to have a use case prioritization process and a set of criteria associated with that?
Yeah, so this might fall under what you consider to be data governance. Data governance can be many things and does not always include the design and development of these types of products. But if there is a group already in place that is making decisions about resources, about what to do next, about how the system will operate, that might be a place to also consider the high priority use cases. States' data governance bodies is one place where there has been a prioritization. There also has been some movement, I don't want to overstate it, toward the development of learning agendas. And learning agendas are another way to think about the information needs of an organization. And so those can be mapped to use cases as well. So to the extent that your state or early learning council maintains a research agenda or a learning agenda, those often are places already where there is some filtering or prioritization of those agenda items. And to the extent that those are mapped to use cases, I think it would make sense to sort of look to those bodies as well.
Okay. If there are not any further questions, I'll go ahead and start wrapping us up for the day. So first of all, thank you to all of our presenters. It was great to hear how Chris shared about how Link B-5 connects communities of childcare and education providers that serve the Birth to 5 pre-K program. And it was great to hear from the New Jersey team on, what's been how their success has been attributed to the development of objectives and questions and strong data governance, cross-agency collaboration, and continuous stakeholder engagement. And then great to hear Phil's points on early childhood data capacity and using data to improve policy and practice, and making those 4 points, but specifically about building capacity and maximizing impact of data efforts and embedding strategic planning and stakeholder engagement. So really thank you all for presenting all of your great work. I do want to close on a few slides, so give me a quick second to pull those up. Okay. Whoops, we've gone back to the beginning. Okay, so before we go, just want to share 2 places where you can go for more information about PDG B-5 and about some of the topics that were covered during the convening. So here is the PDG B-5 website. Just so you're aware of those resources, you'll be able to find many different resources that'll help strengthen and enhance your Birth to 5 mixed delivery system. And then also just a funding clause here and to subscribe to any updates from Office of Child Care. And then lastly, the second resource is the Research Connections website. This is an online library of policy relevant research that contains a lot of information on topics that we've been focusing on this week and will continue to focus on. So thank you all again, and thank you for your attention. And I'll try to drop those links in the chat before we completely close out, so you have those. So enjoy the follow-up session this afternoon. I want to make sure you all have enough time to transition. So thank you all and have a great rest of your conference.